This is section 10.3. We're going to learn about probability. When you roll a standard six-sided die, the possible results are called outcomes. The outcomes of rolling a die. The outcomes of rolling a die are what you can get when you roll a die. So if you're rolling a six-sided die, typically those would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are the possible outcomes. An event is an outcome or a collection of outcomes. For example, the event of rolling an odd number. It consists of the outcomes of 1, 3, and 5. When we talk about probability, the probability is a measure of the likelihood or chance that an event will occur. Probability is a number from 0 to 1. It can be written as a decimal, as a fraction. Those are your two most common ways that we will write probability. Sometimes you will see it written as a percent. When you're dealing with a decimal, or the fraction that represents the decimal, when you have a value that's less than 0.5, it's not likely to occur. If you have a value greater than 0.5, it's more likely to occur. There's two types of probabilities. One is called theoretical probability. Theoretical probability is the number of outcomes in an event over the total number of outcomes. I like to be sure to state that as the probability of A occurring is the favorable over possible. So whenever you read a question that deals with probability, you have to think about what are the favorable ways this can happen and what are the possible ways this can happen. Then you can set up your probability. If you pick a card from a standard deck of 52 playing cards, find the probability of picking an 8. So if you're trying to pick an 8, you always assume that you get your probability. So the probability of an 8 is going to be 4, because those are your favorable, over 52, which is your possible. Favorable over possible. There's 4 favorable over 52 possible, and that can reduce to 1 out of 13. What's the probability of a red king? The probability of a red king, there are 2 possible red kings out of 52 cards. Oh, I'm sorry, I wrote that backwards. There are 2 favorable red kings, and there's 52 cards possible. So that can be reduced down to 1 over 26. A talent agency conducts a talent show for local musicians. On a given evening, 7 musicians are scheduled to perform. The order in which the musicians perform is randomly selected during the show. What is the probability that the musicians perform in alphabetical order by their last name? Remember, this is the probability. So we have to think about what is your favorable ways that that can happen, and what are the possible ways that they can perform. The favorable ways that you can line up in alphabetical order, there is only one way that that can occur. There's one possible way you can line up in alphabetical order. What is the total number of ways you can line up? Well, how many choices do you have for the first performer? How many choices do you have for the second performer and third performer and so forth? That's called 7 factorial. You could also call that 7p7. So using our calculator, that's 1/5040, and that comes out to a pretty small chance that they're going to be in alphabetical order. You are friends with 4 of the musicians. What is the probability that the first 2 performers are your friends? So out of the 7, you know 4 of them. Out of those 4, you're going to choose 2 of them to be the first 2 performers. So out of our 4 that you know, you're choosing 2. This is the number of favorable ways that that can happen. Out of the number of possible ways of choosing those first 2. So those 4 that you know, there's 7 total. So that's going to come out to be 6/21, otherwise known as 2/7. You have a 0.285. So that's a much better chance than the alphabetical way that you'll know 2 of the performers. Something different than probability is called odds. You can use odds to measure the likelihood that an event will occur. Odds measures the chances in favor of an event occurring or the chances against an event occurring. Here are your 2 formulas for that. Odds in favor are the number of outcomes, so that's kind of your favorable, the number of outcomes that it will not occur, which ends up being your not favorable. Now remember, probability was favorable over possible. This is favorable over not favorable. There's a difference. Odds against is the reciprocal of that. Not favorable over favorable. You can write the odds in favor or against an event in the form of A over B. It's A to B, or you can write it with a colon, A to B. A marble is drawn from a bag containing 6 red, 12 yellow, and 9 black marbles. Find the odds in favor of drawing a red marble. Well, how many marbles are red? There are 6 red marbles. That's your favorable. How many are not red? That's your not favorable. So we take our 12 and our 9 to come up with 21. And that can reduce to 2/7, and we can write that as 2 to 7. Odds against is the reciprocal. What's the odds against drawing a black marble? So you're looking for your not favorable. How many are not favorable for this? A black marble. There's 9 of them, so there's 18 that are not. And then there are 9 that are. So that comes out to be 2 over 1, or 2 to 1. On page 3 of 10.3, we're going to look at experimental probability. Sometimes you cannot calculate the theoretical probability. Theoretical probability, remember, is the mathematical probability. You also have geometric probability, and that's by doing an experiment and seeing what you get, like flipping a coin. Flipping a coin, there's a 50% chance you'll get heads. But if you flip it 3 or 4 times in a row, could you possibly get heads 3 or 4 times in a row? And the answer is yes. If you flip a coin 1,000 times, it'll start to balance out. In these cases, you may be able to find the experimental probability by performing an experiment, conducting a survey, or looking at the history of an event. Experimental probability is a number of trials where A occurs, kind of your favorable, over the total number of trials, which is typically your possible. So with example 4, exam grades of students in a history class are shown in the bar graph. Find the probability that a randomly chosen student in the history class receives a C or better. So we want to look at the favorable of that occurring, who gets a C or better, and then what are the total people that are in the class. The total number of students who took the test, there were 3, 1, 8, 12, and 7. So there's 31 students that took the test. 31 are possible. Of those, we have a 7, a 12, and an 8 that got a C or better. A 7, a 12, and an 8. So 27 of those had a C or better. So the probability that at least a C was received, there were 27 of them out of the 31. So with your calculator, that will come out to be 0.71. That's experimental probability. Geometric probability. Some probabilities are found by calculating a ratio of two lengths, areas, or volumes. Such probabilities are geometric. Find the probability that a dart thrown at a rectangular board hits one of the triangles. Remember, we're looking for the probability of our event to be favorable over possible. So when we do our calculations, we have to look at the favorable for hitting a triangle. Then we have to look at the possible for hitting a rectangle. So we're going to find the area of the shaded regions, which are your triangles. We're looking for the sum area of the triangles. and we're going to take that over the area of the rectangle. So the area of the first triangle is half base times height. And the next triangle is half 5 times 8. And then finally half of 3 times 4. This comes out to 12 divided by 2 is 6. 40 divided by 2 is 20. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So that comes out to 32. There's 32 inches squared that are favorable. Out of the possible, there's a 10 times 40. So that's 400 inches squared in the total rectangle. So the probability that your dart is going to hit a triangle is your favorable out of possible. 0.08 is your probability.